United Healthcare CEO being shot. I don't know if any news is broken about the motives in the last hour or so, but
we don't know who the shooter is, so we have no idea what his motive is.
So without knowing, it's pretty clear and pretty obvious without knowing. And even if it's not clear or obvious and it turns out to be something else in this case, it's pretty clear and obvious that because of Republican ethos, because of right-wing conservative ethos of letting companies steal from us and promoting rage and promoting gun culture, someone decided to take, matters into their own hands because United Health. Now, that's not clear yet in this particular case, but that would be that's a pretty easy assumption. And even if it turns out not to be the case, it's a through line, between Trumpists, Elon Muskists, destroying our culture.
Yeah, the bottom line, Brian, is it's a great opportunity to talk about a great opportunity. That sounds like I'm cheerleading for somebody's death. I'm not, but it presents an opportunity to the news media to talk about Medicare Advantage and the practices of big insurance, but they're not going to take that opportunity. Sadly, until or if we learn what this guy's motive was. I mean, it's possible that the CEO of United Healthcare had an affair with this guy's wife. I mean, we just don't know, right? We just don't know.
It's possible, but it doesn't matter entirely. I mean, it matters for that particular case, but the through lines of the connection that people are drawing, whether they're true or not, are not untrue. Like, even if, okay, this guy, it was an affair. Still, the through lines of the people getting screwed by billionaires, by CEOs, by healthcare, getting culture promoted.
There's a whole thread over on Democratic Underground basically speculating, is this the Bulls uprising? And I don't want to go there. I don't think that's healthy, and I don't think this is that. I think we're away from that, frankly. But Brian, thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
I don't know if you have heard that the United Healthcare CEO was shot and killed this morning.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, I don't think this was random. In my opinion, this is a result of activities, the decisions made by United Healthcare. Our state has had, as a retired state employee, they've had us on United Healthcare for a couple of years. And when I received paperwork from United Healthcare that so far my healthcare has, my providers, the hospitals, the clinics, the doctors, have submitted $6,800, and they've paid a total of $1,800. And this is Advantage Medicare. And what did they get, Tom, last year? $149 billion? Isn't that what you reported in January?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. And so you have a CEO shot down on the street, and I'm hoping that this is not a continuous pattern of people who they've watched someone die because they're denied. My chiropractor was denied the last time I went. The only payment they received was a $15 copay out of my pocket. Okay. And that, this is.
So your
I've
question,
been denied
Norma,
an
for
MRI.
Congressman Pocan?
When can we have expanded Medicare? Please, y'all do what you can and see if you can't get some kind of control over these companies that are not paying the doctors, the clinics, and the hospitals. It's all going into their pockets. This is Reagan's doing, changing the law.
Let's let him answer the question because we only have 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, Norma, the real problem is just the way Medicare Advantage works. You have to get prior authorization for care. They deny millions of claims a year. Over 80%, I forgot the exact number now, over 80% of them get turned over in appeal. It shows that they're just trying to nickel and dime, but that means your life is at risk and your illness can continue, especially at a vulnerable point in your life. So people should just be aware of that. I think this is the end of that open enrollment period where people sign up, Tom. It's good to remind people.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to write another op-ed about Medicare Advantage. It's been a while. Thank you. 51 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be right back on the other side of this break with Congressman Pocan answering your questions. Stick around. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Tuesday. A lot going on in the world. Donald Trump is on TV right now doing an extended rant, basically a rally. I mean, it's just bizarre. I'm just astonished that the networks are carrying these things in their entirety when they're so filled with lies. You know, it's just, I had to turn off 2 networks in a row. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about today. America chose wealth over well-being, how billionaires rewrote the American dream. In our first hour. Also, lawyer up, buddy. A MAGA attorney is threatening Trump's judge. Judge Merchan tells him to go to hell. Are we now entering the new MAGA bully world where the bullying comes from the federal government down? Also, is Donald Trump going to be able to suppress Jack Smith's report? We'll talk about those things in the first hour of our program. In the second hour of the program, is the entire internet about to become the wild, wild west? Things are changing. Also, dear MAGA workers, you got played. And also in the second hour, how Trump plans to get rid of birthright citizenship, what that even means, and how it's in our Constitution. What are the exceptions to it, and what does John Eastman and Donald Trump have up their sleeves? They even want to deport the children of immigrants who are U.S. citizens legally. And in our third hour, Jim Stewartson is going to drop by. Is Trump planning a North American empire? What's going on here? Is this hyperbole, or is there actually a plan behind all this stuff? Lots of strange stuff. I want to start out today, though, with my daily take over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, America Chose Wealth Over Well-Being, How Billionaires Rewrote the American Dream. And, while other nations offer universal benefits, we double down on having billionaires. Yeah. Yesterday, Congress certified the electoral count vote, making a billionaire president again, starting after he's sworn in on January 20th. Yep, we chose a billionaire again, after other billionaires spent billions to convince us to make that choice. So as you're, listening to my voice right this moment, billionaires from America and around the world are making a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to kiss Donald Trump's ass and hand him, million envelopes with $1 million checks in them, which represent for most of them, at most, a few minutes or a few hours of income for them or their companies. Meanwhile, our billionaire president is packing his cabinet with billionaires, the most in the history of the world. Something that's being celebrated over on billionaire-owned Fox News and billionaire-owned hate radio networks, as well as the billionaire-owned Washington Post, the billionaire-owned LA Times, and the roughly half of American local newspapers that are owned by billionaire hedge funds. Here's the bottom line. Other developed countries enjoy benefits like free health care and college, modern mass transit, affordable housing, food, and drugs. They also have inexpensive internet and phone service without companies listening in and selling their information, schools that don't even need to mention school shooters, and streets and parks filled with pedestrians and children instead of tents for the homeless. Additionally, they benefit from renewable electricity that gets cheaper every year while cleaning their environment. So that's what other countries have. Here, we have the world's largest collection of billionaires. Seriously, that's our distinction. And most Americans probably don't realize it, but this was a choice we made in 1980. Now, there's a little history here. We were battered badly in 1973, the tail end of the Nixon administration, when we took Israel's side in the I believe it was the 6-Day War, and the Arab nations punished us by cutting off our oil supplies. This produced an explosion of inflation here in the United States and led to basically an economic crash and threw us into about a 15-year-long period of what was then referred to as stagflation, which was high unemployment combined with high inflation. And Nixon couldn't deal with it, right? His alternate days for the gas pumps, odd, even days, depending on your license plate number, just pissed off people. Didn't work. Jerry Ford couldn't handle it. He had his whip inflation now buttons, the big buttons that said WIN, like we were all supposed to wear them. And yes, we're going to whip inflation. Yeah, that was pathetic. It kind of guaranteed that he'd become a one-term president. And Jimmy Carter made some good progress. He actually got inflation down quite substantially. He also put together the National Solar Bank, which was going to provide 20% of our nation's power by the year 2000. Put solar panels on the White House. But Reagan's campaign cut a deal with the Ayatollahs in Iran to hold the hostages, and that was the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency. By the time Reagan became president in 1981, inflation was still a problem. Part of it was an echo of the 1973 oil embargo, but also in 79, when the Iranian Revolution happened, that disrupted oil supplies to the United States and around the world. So there was a second oil shock that produced another problem that, again, hurt Jimmy Carter in 79. So by that time, by 1980, by that election, I mean, we'd had 15 years, basically, 17 years, 18 years, 17 years of stagflation, of inflation and high unemployment and an economy that just didn't seem to be working. And it wasn't the fault of the New Deal. It was because we were so dependent on oil, and there had been these two major oil shocks, the first in 73 with the Arab oil embargo and the second in 79 with the Iranian Revolution. But, along came Reagan. He was a very talented actor. I mean, even more talented than Donald Trump, although Trump has been, NBC spent millions training Donald Trump to perform for the television cameras, and he's made good use of that. But Reagan was even better. And Reagan convinced us that he had the solution to the problem. Now, of course, the solution to the problem was time, right? Just like we're seeing right now. When you have a shock, like the COVID shock, or the Arab oil embargo shock, or the Iranian Revolution oil shock, when you have an economic shock like that, it takes a decade or so to work your way out of it. But Reagan, knowing that, better times would be coming, basically said, oh, we've got the solution. It's these magical things, supply-side economics, the Laffer curve, and trickle down. And George Herbert Walker Bush called this voodoo economics at first, and then he became, vice president, and suddenly he was a true believer. And, Reagan took office, and we, I didn't believe him, but a lot of Americans did. And he turned our economy inside out. He massively cut taxes on the country's 13 billionaires. Yes, there were 13 billionaires then. Repeatedly raised taxes on millions of working class people, cut and taxed Social Security, stopped enforcement of our anti-monopoly laws, gutted federal funds for education, killed off 2/3 of the country's unions, and by negotiating the GATT and NAFTA agreements, began the process of offshoring over 60,000 factories, millions of jobs. Now, Reagan never got inflation below 4%, and he tripled the national debt from $800 million to about $2.2 billion. But throwing around a couple $1 trillion in borrowed money made the economy look good, and that's how we got the billionaires. Because Reagan, cut taxes so radically. In 1980, the year of the election, the richest man in America was a guy by the name of Daniel Ludwig. He was a shipping tycoon, and he was worth $2 billion. Today, he wouldn't even make the Forbes 500 list. And he lived a low-key life, and like most wealthy men of that era, he did not participate, in any significant way in politics. But Reagan's changes in the tax code, dropping the top income tax rate on multi-million-dollar incomes from 74% down to 25%, and then raising it up to 28%. That caused an explosion in the number of billionaires. By 1990, there were 99 billionaires in America. Today, there's over 800 of them. That's a 50-fold increase in billionaires in just 4 decades. And then the billionaires, not content with just being rich, decided to take over our politics. They set up institutions to seize control of the independent judiciary. 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court returned the favor with Citizens United, saying, okay, billionaires, you can now buy politicians. And so they went out and bought the entire Republican Party and a good-sized handful of Democrats. They created media empires, think tanks, policy centers. They write their own legislation and hand it off to Republicans who then introduce it. They purchased, like I said, the entire RNC. Total spending on federal elections, President, House, and Senate in 1980 was $92 million. It was $103 million in 84. It was $324 million in 1988. Wasn't that quaint? In this last election, we know of $7 billion that was spent, including $250 million by Elon Musk just to put Trump in office. And that doesn't count the dark money, which is probably several more $1 billion. And we don't talk about this in our media because our media is owned by billionaires too. Now, maybe one day America will join the other 37 wealthy OECD countries in offering, to average and low-income people nearly free college and health care, removing guns from our streets and our schools, housing the homeless, building modern mass transit. Maybe our middle class will again become socially and economically mobile. We'll rid ourselves of $2 trillion in student debt. Joe Biden tried to do that. Republicans sued to the Supreme Court and stopped him. And maybe someday we'll never again be the only developed country in the world where 500,000 families lose everything, to have to declare bankruptcy because somebody in the family got sick. But for at least the next 4 years, we have to content ourselves with the proud knowledge that we have more billionaires than any other country in the world, and that they now run our government. The top 1% own 40.5% of our nation's entire wealth. As the Forbes headline says, quote, the 3 richest Americans hold more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country. Yep, sure enough. We're number 1. And for at least the next 4 years, Donald Trump and the Republican Party promise to do everything they can to keep it that way. It's 17 minutes past the hour. Lawyer up, buddy. They're threatening judges now. Trump's buddies are threatening judges. We'll be right back with that. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
So much, but, I just feel like I'm going insane. Donald Trump is not legally or officially the first lady to President Musk. I'm sorry. He's not legally or officially the president.
Right.
And no one's saying it. That's not my words. Those are SCOTUS's words. SCOTUS said he can't be kept off the ballot. They never said whether he could be, serve or not. They just pushed the.
Well, actually, they did.
The
Actually, they did. I was wrong about that before the end of the year when I said that. And in fact, I was educated by a great video that Ben Mysalis from Midas Touch put together. The fact of the matter is that what the Supreme Court actually said was that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says if you started an insurrection, you can't serve, does not actually exist. It doesn't apply. It has to be, Congress has to pass a law to put it into effect. And Congress never passed that law. So here we are.
Okay, but SCOTUS did weigh in apparently, but they committed a crime.
I agree with you, Brian. I don't think he should be. I disagree with the Supreme Court. First of all, I think that their interpretation is wrong. And by the way, Amy Coney Barrett joined the three Democrats on the court in saying that interpretation is wrong. Unanimously, although they took down the Colorado and Maine's efforts to take Trump off the ballot, but that was a different rationale. That was that this is a federal election and states don't control federal elections. It has to be the federal government that does this. So it should have been Merrick Garland that took him off the ballot, frankly.
Well, once he,
but Merrick Garland he's a terrified little man.
So all that is against our Constitution. But even and you agree. But even once the second there are people in jail right now who have been put there because they have been adjudicated to be, to have committed insurrection against this country.
Yeah, sedition specifically, yes.
Sedition. Section 14, Amendment 3 says if we're living on this technicality that Donald Trump hasn't been convicted of that and blah, blah, blah.
No, the technicality is that Congress has to pass a law saying, yes, Section 3 is now the law. Section 5 of the 14th Amendment says Congress may pass appropriate legislation enacting the provisions of this law. Now, those primarily related to Sections 1 and 2, which established equal protection under the law and some other provisions, which are very vague notions. And so Congress had to clarify what that means. And of course, it was meant to by and large give black people, equal access to the law as white people. And we know that like Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898 blew that one up. But the Section 5 says Congress can pass legislation to put this into effect. And the Supreme Court decided, or at least, 6 conservatives on the Supreme, or 5 conservatives on the Supreme Court decided that until Congress writes a law saying, yep, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is real, it can be enforced now, until that happens.
I mean, America no longer exists.
Well, America still exists, but, we've been pretty badly screwed by these guys, and they're hell-bent for leather to continue it. Brian, I got to run. Thanks for the call. 22, I do agree with you by and large, though. 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out.
We turned our backs on what we need, chased the glitter, fed the greed. From Reagan's rise to Trump's parade, a billionaire kingdom we've remade. Free healthcare, it's just a dream, while yachts glide down a golden stream. We chose the few, forgot the rest, built this empire of excess. America chose wealth over well-being, blind to the pain its people are seeing. The homeless freeze, the hungry cry, while billionaires build towers in the sky. Oh, America, when will you see this gilded cage is not the land of the free?
Welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour. Lawyer up, buddy. Mike Davis is a MAGA lawyer. He's one of these Trumpy lawyers, and he was on a right-wing show yesterday, the Benny Johnson show, and just went off on Judge Merchan. He said, "I would say this to Juan Merchan: you better lawyer up, because you are also, what you're doing is a very serious federal civil rights felony against 18 U.S.C. 241. He then added, Judge Merchan can also go to hell. Lawyer up, buddy. He went on a rant about that all of the people that had been prosecuted for, trying to kill police officers on January 6th, and actually killing 4 of them, that they should absolutely bring civil lawsuits against these, he called them Biden prosecutors. And he said they should let these prosecutors get sued in their individual capacities and have to hire their own private lawyers to defend themselves. Why? Because he wants to break them, right? He said, this could mean the destruction of the people who did this. This could mean financial, political, and personal destruction of the people who did this. I mean, these aren't just idle threats. God willing, they should face severe, and I mean the most severe legal, political, and financial consequences for what they've done. And he adds, it's going to start at noon on January 20th. So we'll see. We'll see where we go. How much retribution Trump and his Justice Department are going to try to engage in. I have a feeling this is going to be very, very grim. Meanwhile, Trump's lawyers have asked Merrick Garland to block Jack Smith's final report. They say it contains discredited accusations. All right. Todd Blanche and John Lauro. By the way, Todd Blanche is going to be the Deputy Attorney General if things work out the way Trump hopes. Trump's lawyers, his 2 lawyers who defended him, in Judge Merchan's courtroom. And, they called this Jack Smith politically motivated and said this was all an attempt to influence the election, quack, quack, quack. Smith is putting together a report documenting the crimes that Donald Trump committed, the multiple crimes that he committed. And they do not want this report to be released. They are desperate for this report not to be released. So this one is going through the court system very rapidly. And in all probability, we'll know within a week or so how this one shakes out. So stay tuned. What does Liz Cheney have to say about that? I'll tell you that after the break, and I'll pick up your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where despair is not an option. I'll be right back with your calls and the news of the day.
Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker, or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down, and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
Once upon a time in the land of the free, justice was blind, but now it's hard to see.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Well, breaking news. I was just telling you about this 2-volume report that Jack Smith has prepared for you and me, for the American public to see. About volume 1 is about Donald Trump stealing classified documents from the White House, taking them down to Mar-a-Lago and making them available to Chinese and Russian spies. Volume 2, allegedly. And volume 2 is about Donald Trump's alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election. And Judge Eileen Cannon has just issued a ruling. She's a federal judge down in Florida, blocking the release, preventing any, quote, releasing, sharing, or transmitting any part of that, any drafts of that, or any conclusions from it. She told, Smith's office, Jack Smith's office, also today, also this morning, told the court, this would be Eileen Cannon's court, that Judge Garland, that Attorney General Merrick Garland might not make this report available to the public anyway. So, Trump's lawyers, by the way, have read this draft report. The Justice Department regulations require special prosecutors to come up with a report. Remember the Ken Starr report that it read like a porn novel. All about what Clinton was doing with Monica Lewinsky and in the copy machine room next to the Oval Office. Well, apparently, a similar report about Trump is not going to come out. By the way, Tanya Chutkan, who oversaw the federal election interference case, which was ongoing until Trump won the election, then she dismissed it, saying that this can't go forward because he's president now, or he will be shortly. She disagrees with Eileen Cannon. But I'm telling you, Eileen Cannon, if Trump has an opportunity to put somebody on the Supreme Court, she's probably at the top of that list. I don't think she was smart enough to become Attorney General. He's looking for a pit bull, there. But somebody who will go after Democrats and things. And I think she's just a useful idiot type. But there you go. Meanwhile, Liz Cheney says that this effort to suppress Jack Smith's 2-volume report. This is what she wrote on Elon Musk's Nazi-infested social media site. She wrote, "Trump is trying yet again to hide evidence and suppress the truth. The Justice Department has obtained testimony and evidence from dozens of Trump's former advisors and Vice President Pence, showing the danger that Trump poses. Now Trump is already doing what despots do. He is trying to conceal the truth and threatening to jail those who investigated him. The congressional report yesterday destroying Loudermilk's fraudulent allegation shows the despicable malice behind Trump's efforts." She went on to say, Attorney General Garland now has a duty to release the Justice Department report and prevent its evidence from being destroyed. The truth must prevail. The framers of our Constitution knew the lessons of history, that people led by men without character can quickly lose their freedom. Yeah, you tell them, Liz. So, what's on your mind today? Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We've talked many times. Did you have a good Christmas and New Year, I hope?
We did, yeah. We had a marvelous Christmas with our family, and then the next day we went to Australia and spent a week and a half with a dear old friend, Dr. Richard Silberstein, who's been on this program. Silberstein, excuse me.
It's good because we look forward to a quiet Christmas and New Year's, anticipating what's going to happen on January 20th, you know what I mean? It's scary stuff. But, Trump's giving his little spiel from Mar-a-Lago right now, and virtually everything that's coming out of his mouth is an outright lie, of course. Yeah. And, it's really ironic what's going on is he keeps trashing the Biden administration, or literally trying to make a decent transition. What the Democrats have to do on a national, local, and level and everything is avoid having anybody of any authority go to his inauguration. You see what I mean? That's scary stuff.
Yeah, I suppose I'll probably listen to his speech because it's my business and I have to. But if I was,
you're obligated to do that because of what you do. I understand that.
If I was any average American, though, I as it is, I'll probably have to pull out one of the old airline barf bags.
And think about how ridiculous that is. You get that Jim Crow generational stupidity in the South. My parents were grew up in the Midwest in basically little all-white towns. My dad was career Army and was stationed in the South. I have a brother born in Texas, so I know the area down there. Mm-hmm. And basically, what's transitioned over the last 100 years is going to stay in place with those people. That it works on emotion and not logic. If you're born and grew up in the South and you're a registered Republican, you voted for Trump, and you watch Fox News, that about summarizes the whole situation. That's not going to change.
You're right.
It's as simple as that.
You're right.
Right.
We'll see how as the old. I don't know if it's really an old Chinese curse or if that's just an old, whatever apocryphal saying. But we live in interesting times. So here we are. Tim, thanks for the call. Always nice to hear from you. Appreciate it. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Speaking of the Midwest. Hey, Denise, what's up?
Hi. Nice to talk to you, Tom.
Thank you.
I was watching Rachel Maddow last night, and she talked about how the Pope has assigned a new archbishop for Washington, D.C., who was very vocal and very much against the deportation of immigrants.
Right. He's very progressive.
And my reaction to that was visceral in that all these Catholics, and I am a Democratic person, and I'm also Catholic. Mm. And it's really hard looking at what they did for all these years, praying over one issue and voting for this man, and then now it's suddenly the immigrants. Why weren't they thinking about them this whole time? It's just hypocritical to me. It's disheartening.
Yeah. Well, the Pope also, by the way, put a nun in charge of a whole bunch of priests, a region. They have these regional things, and this is the first time that a woman has been elevated to that level of power in the Catholic Church. I think I'm very impressed by this Pope. I met Pope John Paul II. Louise and I had a private audience with him. But I've never met this Pope, but I have Pope Francis. But I have so much respect for him. Yeah.
I know that he talked shortly before the election with a bend. His talk was to not vote for Trump, and
it was kind of the implication of it.
Yes, and I love this Pope. It's just the people within the church proper who every week got together to pray the rosary about the one issue of abortion. Yeah. And they look at you if you're not. If you're a Democrat, like you're too liberal for us, so fine, but I'm not going to give up on my faith, and I'm not giving up on the teachings of Jesus and the Beatitudes.
There you go. Yep. Ditto. Denise, thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to hear from you. Okay. Claire in Chicago. Hey, Claire, what's up?
Hi, can you hear me?
Just fine, Claire.
Hi, I was calling regarding Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Mm-hmm. Basically, you just said something about that that Congress never made it into a law. But I just emailed you an article from two constitutional lawyers. The article is very in depth, and I thought, he put something in there. I don't know if you covered it, but in the article, I'll just read you that one little tiny portion of it. It just says that, let's see, the Insurrection Act. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, he said that the Act specifies two grounds for objection to an electoral vote, and that specific legislation already exists from the Electoral Count Act, first enacted in 1887, later amended and restated. But I did contact him to contact you because his article was published in The Hill, Newsweek.
No, I read
Jessica
it.
Denson had it.
I read it a couple days ago, that's all well and good, but that the Supreme Court disagrees, and the Supreme Court has final say. I mean, I agree with the legal arguments that the Supreme Court ruled wrong. I agree with the legal arguments that they're actually, the Section 3 arguably has been put into law, with multiple pieces of legislation. None of them explicitly point to Section 3. That's part of the problem. But I also agree with the argument that Judge Ludick and others have made that Section 3 is actually self-executing. It doesn't require congressional legislation, as is the case with most of the rest of the Constitution. But my opinion doesn't matter in a court of law. My opinion doesn't matter when it comes to swearing in a president. The opinion of the majority of the justices on the Supreme Court is the opinion that matters, and they've ruled.
Well, the thing is this, Congress had the legal constitutional right to put up an objection, and they didn't. And when Kamala Harris said, that she honors her her oath of office to follow the rule of law, I'm thinking, don't you honor your oath to, enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? I mean, you could have put up an objection. You could have tried. I mean,
she could have. It would have failed.
Cowards.
It would have failed because the Republicans now control both the House and Senate. There's no way it would have succeeded, and what it would have done is given more credibility to Republican obstructionism and Republican efforts to just basically sabotage our government at every turn, and I think that was her concern. I understand, I would like to see Democrats fight harder. I'd like to see Democrats speaking out more loudly. I would have liked to have seen Kamala Harris fighting harder. But I also understand that, she didn't want to engage in a futile effort that would just, backfire PR-wise.
I think it made the Democrats look like cowards to our allies across the globe. It's sickening to me.
Well, they believe that it made the Democrats look like people who honor the rule of law. So, what can you say? Claire, thank you for the call.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. I'll be right back with your calls right after this. And welcome back, Steve and Kaylee. Is it Kaylee or Katy, Texas? It's Katy, right?
Katy, Texas.
Okay, what's up, Steve?
I just wanted to make a little bit of a comment about the special sort, the Green Beret guy who blew himself off up in Las Vegas.
Yeah. There's
a couple things that I heard that I have kind of an idea of what NCOs go through when they're reaching retirement. So he was 37 years old, and so he would have been within 2 years of 20-year retirement, which kind of typically you could retire at 39 or 40. A lot of the NCOs do that, entering from high school. So
do you know that that's the case with him? I don't recall how long he had been in the service.
I'm trying to go that direction. I don't know that for sure. I just wanted to say, though, he had talked to, it was reported that he talked to a girlfriend that's saying he was worried about not getting deployed recently. And I've talked to another NCO that was close to retirement within 2 years, and he was, E6. This guy was an E9. He's very hie. So this guy told me that he was trying to get help, and he said because he was having panic attacks, and that if he pushed it too far, he'd be discharged before retirement. So he was a couple of years away from retirement.
Right.
So
well, it appears that this guy was suffering from PTSD. B, his wife had just notified him that she was going to divorce him, and that seems to be something that pushed him over the edge.
I know all that stuff. I'm just saying there's other stuff going on in the back of his mind that he was. I think he was worried that he'd be kicked out before.
All that may be. I think the part of the story that is getting nowhere near the publicity that it should be getting is that he left a manifesto saying that he wanted Republicans to rise up and take out Democrats. And he said, try by peaceful means, but if that doesn't work, basically go kill Democrats. I mean, he left a manifesto.
I realize he did that as a way of, it's just like, Buddhist monks burning themselves to death to protest in Vietnam. I mean, it's just sort of like he just wanted to end it all and have some sort of a way to excuse himself. I'm just saying, knowing what I know about NCOs, he had a lot of emotional pressure there because he's E9. So he was a master chief. To get higher, he'd have to make command master chief, and to do that, he probably couldn't stay in the special forces. He'd have to be more of an administrator. He'd be reporting to generals and colonels. So he was kind of stuck there in his career.
He was at the high end of the low end of the military.
There was only one place to go higher that almost nobody makes, which is command.
Right.
He was a master sergeant, so he was an E9. And when you talk to enlisted people, E9 is high as they think about.
Yeah.
So he would have had a pretty good retirement if he chose to retire. Granted, he was so messed up. I've also talked to other E9s that were advising lower-level people that were in the special forces, and they were having a hard time. And he advised them to go talk to a general or a high-level guy asked to be put back into special forces, that he was having trouble dealing with.
I get it, Steve, and you clearly are knowledgeable about this. Thanks for sharing that with us. Appreciate the call. 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
Do you have that fire in the belly? The courage to stand, to speak your mind, to lend a hand.
Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Hills in Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Hills, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KFBK.
Yeah, good morning. Tom, my question is, moving forward, super talented Hakeem Jeffries, can he use somewhat of Mitch McConnell's playbook to try to thwart the most damaging parts of the new administration's agenda, including Supreme Court appointments?
We'll see. First of all, no. The simple answer to your question is no, because the Supreme Court appointments are cleared by the Senate, not the House. And so that's Chuck Schumer, not Hakeem Jeffries. Also, the House does not have the filibuster. That's in the Senate. John Thune, who is the incoming Republican leader, well, actually not just incoming, he was sworn in on January 3rd. So he's now the Senate Majority Leader, replacing Mitch McConnell. He has said that he's going to keep the filibuster in place, which is interesting because I was predicting that they would blow up the filibuster. But, you can always carve ad hoc holes into it, as Chuck Schumer tried to do to pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act when we got stabbed in the back by Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. But we'll see. I mean, whether Chuck Schumer will be able to block the most toxic parts of the Trump agenda in the Senate using the filibuster, whether John Thune is going to let him do that or not, it's going to be real interesting. But I think that, of all the people in the Senate who could have ended up Senate leader, John Thune is probably one of the more rational. I would have hated to have seen it, become somebody like, Ted Cruz or Lindsey Graham or, one of these, publicity-hungry whack jobs, or even somebody like Mike Lee or Rand Paul, who are just, all full-out ideologues. John Thune is a little more pragmatic. I think that there may be a little bit of balance in the Senate, but we'll see. I'm just, maybe it's my eternal optimism. Hills, thanks for the call. Ken in La Center, Washington. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, you mentioned the gas crisis earlier.
Yeah, back in 73 and 79. Yeah.
Yeah, in 73, I don't think young people can even imagine what it was like to
it was
sit in
crazy.
Lines every other day.
We also had grocery stores that were running out of food because the trucks couldn't run because they couldn't get fuel.
Yeah.
And then there was the trucking strike on top of that, as I recall.
I
It was in 74.
Talk about, I also wanted to talk about the time we were driving these huge cars that weighed over 2 tons, and the Japanese, they had a post-war economy that was just starting to take off, and they invited an economist to come talk to him. I think it was Alan Deming, maybe. And
yeah, Deming was the guy who went over to Japan and taught them just-in-time manufacturing practices, and then brought that back to the United States, saying that it was the Japanese innovation. Yes.
Right, and taught them to grab market share and how important that was.
Right.
So here in the U.S., the big 3 car manufacturers were,
they were caught flat-footed by this, and that's when Toyota and Honda really started to make inroads in the American market. It was in 75, 76, 77. Because the big automakers figured any day now the gas spigot is going to open back up, and it literally never did.
Right. So
we never again had 25 cent a gallon gasoline like we did in 72.
Yeah. Well, they were screaming for tariffs on Japanese cars that were small and fuel efficient.
Yep.
And they finally got tariffs. So what did they do? They didn't.
They didn't start making small
care
cars.
About market share.
Yep.
They raised their prices.
Yep. You're right.
U.S. cars.
Yeah, the big 3 really, they were acting like monopolists. And, I was very proud of the fact that for the first 30 years of my life, or maybe 28 years of my life, I had never paid more than $35 for a car. And I remember in the 70s, I bought a used Toyota. I was just a couple of years old, but it was in pretty bad shape. But it would constantly get keyed in parking lots and things because, I was living in Michigan and people just hated the Toyotas. But it was a little car and it got great gas mileage. So anyhow, Ken, thanks for the walk down memory lane. Appreciate the call. We'll continue our conversation. Is the entire internet going to become the wild, wild west? And dear MAGA voters, you got played. How are you going to deal with this one? Also, Trump wants to get rid of birthright citizenship. We got a lot to talk about in the next hour. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from Chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, welcome to the second hour of our program. Just a couple of quick updates on the press conference that Trump just held down in Florida. We pay attention to it, so you don't have to. This is the top line. A reporter asked Donald Trump, are you going to rule out using economic or military force to take the Panama Canal or get control of Greenland? And Trump said, no, I cannot assure you on either of those two, but I can say this, we need them for economic security. And, of course, this morning, Donald Trump Jr. arrived in Greenland. Now, how they're going to treat him, what they're going to say to him, I don't know. This is going to get weird. This is going to be interesting. Trump also said that that all hell would break loose if Hamas or Hezbollah or all of the above hadn't released all the Israeli hostages by the day of his inauguration, and once again said he wants to make Canada an American state, and said that he's going to make major pardons for those criminals who tried to beat police officers to death and killed, in fact, 4 police officers. Trump wants to do that. You have to wonder why. I mean, why does Donald Trump want a couple thousand people who are willing to engage in violence on his behalf to be out on the streets again? Is he trying to build the brown shirts? You know, Hitler's brown shirts or Mussolini's black shirts, these volunteer corps of militias, you know, ragtag militias that just go around terrorizing enemies of the administration? I don't know the answer to that. We're going to have to wait and see. Trump also said, and this is an interesting one, that Mark Zuckerberg was basically terrified by him. He said that Zuckerberg probably was the word Trump used, ended the company's fact-checking program because of the threats that Trump had made against the company. So this is, you know, a big deal. Zuckerberg released a video this morning saying that he's going on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. And, you know, any other platforms that Meta owns. I don't know, you know, what the size of their empire is beyond those three. But he specifically said, quote, "We're going to get rid of fact checkers to replace them with community notes similar to X starting in the U.S." And then Joel Kaplan, who is Meta's chief global affairs officer, said, and I quote, "It has become clear that there is too much political bias in what they choose to fact check because basically they get to fact check whatever they see on the platform." He said, "We're ending that completely." Now, it's interesting, and, you know, help me crowdsource this. Maybe I'm missing something here. But I can, you know, just off the top of my head, I can come up with, you know, a half a dozen or a dozen easily disproved, but, you know, Republican lies that are not only easily disproved, but that Republicans continue to cling to. You know, there's no global warming, or if there is, it's just natural climate variation, that the 2020 election was stolen, that we could just, there's just a whole pile of them, right? I can't think of any lies that Democrats have promulgated. You know, Republicans are repeating Putin's point that, in fact, Trump repeated it again at his press conference this morning, that Putin had to invade Ukraine because NATO was getting too close to him. Yeah, which is a lie, okay? The Republicans have adopted this as an anti-Ukraine lie. I can't think of any lies that the Democrats have used for political purposes in the last couple of decades. I mean, the last one I can think of was when Lyndon Johnson said that we were attacked at the Gulf of Tonkin back in, what was it, 1963? 64? But I mean, since then, can you think of a lie that Democrats have used to gain political power? I mean, there's a long list of ones Republicans use. I just find that fascinating. And so now you've got, you know, these big social media companies saying, well, we're going to allow politically motivated lies on our platforms. And it's like the Democrats are not pushing politically motivated lies. So who's this going to benefit? Only one group, Republicans. And, you know, like Trump said this morning in his little press conference, you know, he probably scared the crap out of Mark Zuckerberg by threatening him and his company. And then Zuckerberg, you know, came to Mar-a-Lago with $1 million check to, you know, lay at Trump's feet as he kissed his butt. So Kaplan went on to say, you know, the global affairs officer at Meta, he said, "We have the power to change the rules. And we're not just changing the rules, we're actually changing how we enforce the rules." This was on Fox News. He was on Fox Digital this morning. He said, "We have a new administration coming in," that's Trump, "that is far from pressuring companies to censor and is more a huge supporter of free expression. It gets us back to the values that Mark founded the company on." But keep in mind, Facebook was founded on rating women at Harvard. How hot they are, you know, size of their boobs, how their ass looks, you know, what their face looks like. That's what Facebook was founded on. That's why it was called Facebook. He went on to say, "We do think it is a real opportunity to work with the Trump administration." Wowie zowie. Meanwhile, dear MAGA workers, or MAGA voters, you got played. This is Charlie Nash writing over at Mediaite, quoting Newsweek opinion editor Batya Ungar Sargon, who says that the reason Now, by the way, I disagree with this analysis, but I think it's a fascinating one, and I'll share my opinion with you after I share his. The reason why Elon Musk is now wading into British politics, and here's the story. 10 years ago, there was this scandal involving a bunch of Pakistani men, British Pakistani ancestry men, who were grooming teenage white girls to basically be prostitutes for them, and or to exploit them sexually. And they were prosecuted by Keir Starmer, who is the current, Prime Minister of the UK, and is a member of the Labour Party. In other words, he's the liberal, by using our words, our definition. And so he actually stepped up the prosecution of these guys. But Musk is rewriting history and saying that he was, quote, complicit in the rape of Britain, meaning, British white girls. And this is an issue that really hasn't even been discussed for a decade in Great Britain. It was dealt with back in the day, but Musk has decided to revive it because, hey, it's all about brown-skinned men having sex with white-skinned teenage girls. And, oh my God, this, for a South African who grew up under apartheid, this kind of stirring the pot just makes perfect sense, I would imagine. But anyhow, the Newsweek opinion editor says that the reason that Musk is doing this is so that we'll stop talking about his trying to get more H-1B visas so that he can fire American engineers and hire Indian engineers from India, at half the price or a quarter of the price, a much, much lower salary. And, certainly that's going on. And I don't disagree, but I don't, in fact, he also goes off on Unger Sargon, the opinion editor over at Newsweek, goes off on Musk for being a shill for the Chinese government. He says Elon is not even in it just for himself. He's a shill of the Chinese Communist Party. For all his masquerading as some sort of maverick who always tells the truth and always exploits in his views, blah, 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 what he thinks, he's never once criticized the Chinese Communist Party. She continues, he's constantly saying embarrassing, humiliating, bending the knee things about how great the Chinese Communist Party is because, of course, his entire supply chain for Tesla's in China. Well, it's not the entire supply chain, but it's a good chunk of it. Unger Sargon, by the way, supported Donald Trump. So this is another one of those, oh, look at this, the MAGA wars are coming kind of thing. Now, I think the reason Musk is involving himself in British politics, and the reason he's involving himself in German politics, and the reason he's involving himself in Italian politics, and arguably other countries around the world, is because he wants to be the richest man in the world. He wants to be the world's first trillionaire, and he wants to be basically emperor of the newly constructed hardcore right-wing, resembling South African apartheid government of the new, kind of the free world, the allies, as it were. But that's just a guess. I mean, that's just my opinion. I think he has, these grandiose notions of himself and his future and, the role he can play in the world that, come out of having had a fairly miserable childhood and a kind of crazy couple of parents. But, I've never met him and don't know him, so it's just a wild-ass guess. Interested to hear your opinions.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Up next, how conservatives are going to try to get rid of birthright citizenship and start deporting children of immigrants. Stick around. And welcome back. Vance in Sarber, Pennsylvania. Hey, Vance, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing, sir, today, sir?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. I wanted to say it's a pleasure to talk to you also. I was wondering why you think the Prime Minister of Canada is resigning in front of Trump's inauguration. Did he realize that there's going to be too much of a headache for him, or?
I think that he's resigning because he knew that when the elections happen in March, there's no way he could win, and so he's just gracefully exiting, and that will, grease the path for his next incarnation, politically or in business, rather than running and getting humiliated.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. And also, Tom, I was going to ask you, the Nippon Steel merger with U.S. Steel, Trump's against it. What's your take on it? Is it good for us, or is it bad for us? Or?
Well, the downside of having foreign ownership of major American corporations is that the profits go overseas. They don't stay in the United States. And so in that context, I'm opposed to it. I'll tell you right up front, though, Vance, I have not really looked into this carefully. I don't know a great deal about it. I know that the Biden administration is opposed to it, too. They've stopped it so far, and they're being sued over that. So this might be one of those rare occasions where Joe Biden and Donald Trump agree on something, and they're both right.
Yeah. And, Tom, one more thing I have to say. You mentioned the Gulf of Tonkin incident that sparked the Vietnamese war in Vietnam. Do you know who the admiral of the vessel that was in the Gulf of Tonkin? Do you know who the commander of the
I did at one time, and I remember it was a weird thing, but I don't. Say that again?
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison's dad. Is that the deal?
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
There's a really groovy website called, it's called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by Dave McGowan, the late Dave McGowan. And there's some real cool connections that he makes in this whole
strange coincidences.
Diatribe,
like John Hinckley's father having lunch with George Herbert Walker Bush while John Hinckley was trying to assassinate Ronald Reagan. There's just all kinds of weird stuff out there. And I don't think that that's part of some grand conspiracy. But anyhow, Vance, thanks for the call. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, quite a bit. I want to start with the pardoning that Trump is more than likely going to do. And I guess he said the other day something about, well, he's going to take a case-by-case basis and so on. But just about everyone that's in prison right now is there because they committed an act of violence.
Yeah, the vast majority
of the Capitol.
Of them. Yeah, well over 80%.
Exactly. So we're talking about letting out some real weird people, for one, people who
violent criminals.
Totally. Yeah, they are violent criminals. Now, I don't know how the D.C. cops are going to take that, but I'm just wondering if that act alone of pardoning and letting these people out is going to somehow spark some kind of a payback.
It's going to be interesting because if Trump tries to cut a middle ground, and just pardon some of them, then he's going to get a lot of crap from the hard right and from the militia groups that he depends on. If he pardons all of them, then there's going to be a broad belief that he's trying to build an army for a civil war or something like that, which may be right. Dennis, thanks for the call. Interested in a commercial-free podcast of the Thom Hartmann Program? You can find it over at thom.tv, THOM.tv.
Of power, shadows grow, where democracy fades and secrets flow. From ancient times, a tale unfolds of kingdoms rising, stories told in Sumer's sands and China's fields. Myths, American temples, secrets revealed. Europe's castles where power reigned. The echoes whisper, history stained.
Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour. The bogus case against birthright citizenship. John Eastman, Donald Trump played a movie, apparently, lionizing John Eastman. John Eastman was the guy who was the architect of the idea that they could repeat what happened in 1876. You'll recall that back in March of 2020, that was 7, 8, 9 months, many months it was before the election. I think that's 7 from March to November, isn't it? But whatever. That I wrote an article, published it at a Hartmann Report. It got published also on AlterNet and a few other places. I wrote an article saying, in fact, it might not have been in Hartmann Report at that time. I'm not even sure we were doing Hartmann Report at that time. But I wrote this article saying that I had inside sources. I had actually a right-wing talk show host friend in Washington, D.C., or acquaintance, who had told me that what was coming down the road was that they were going to try to, that the Trump campaign was going to try to get some states that had, where the Electoral College vote went for Joe Biden, to put up a separate slate of electors for Trump, just like what happened in 1876, in the election of 1876, where we ended up with a Republican president, even though the Democrat had won both the Electoral College vote and the majority vote. And and that was the deal that made that all happen, was the deal to end Reconstruction. There's a whole backstory there. I've talked about it before in the program. But anyhow, I wrote this piece saying, expect this to happen. And nobody took it seriously. I talked to Keith Ellison at the time. He was the head of the DNC. And he kind of laughed at it, or, he didn't laugh at it, but he said, well, okay, strange theory. But it's exactly what happened. And it was John Eastman who put this thing together. Well, John Eastman, and who was, Fonnie Willis is trying to prosecute him, and he's being prosecuted in other states for the fake elector schemes. Accused felon. Well, John Eastman now has this new theory that he can figure out a way to end birthright citizenship. And in fact, Trump told Kirsten Welker in that Meet the Press interview, we have to end it. We're the only country that has it. Now, that's a lie. Canada, Mexico, Brazil, there's all kinds of countries around the world that have birthright citizenship. But Trump can't say anything without lying. But the 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And what John Eastman is saying is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof is the loophole that we can drive a truck through. Now, that is a loophole. Back in 1898, the Supreme Court in U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark said that children of foreign diplomats and children of military invaders in the United States do not get birthright citizenship. Why? Well, because foreign diplomats are not subject to American law. That's why they don't have to pay traffic tickets. That's why they can't be prosecuted here. And foreign invaders, by definition, are not subject to American law because they're invading. They're trying to overthrow American law. So that's a well-established, 130-year-long established provision that says that there are some exceptions to birthright citizenship. So what he is saying here now, also Native Americans didn't, because they were members of separate nations that claimed separate nationhood. So they weren't, quote, subject to our laws. And so what Eastman is saying is that this subject to jurisdiction means that because the parents are in this country illegally, they are not subject to our jurisdiction. We don't know about them. We don't, and now this is an argument that doesn't, to most legal scholars, makes no sense. But this is the core argument that he's got, and that he's going to be taking, I predict, he and Trump will take to the United States Supreme Court. And if this wins at the Supreme Court, suddenly all those dreamers, they're going to lose any chance of U.S. citizenship. And an entire generation, millions of people who are first-generation immigrants, whose parents were here illegally, are going to lose their citizenship. This is going to get wild.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And of course, the ones that they will go after are not the the Norwegians who are here or the Irish. There's a lot of them who are here illegally, and they're going to go after people with brown skin.
Back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last two chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer, for no reason at all, and addled Ruby.
a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in Chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by 3 mafia godfathers, Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Traficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All 3 were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com.
Turn the dial, tune in, and you'll find a voice of reason for the open mind. On Lefty Talk Radio, we speak the truth about the American dream for me and you. Lefty Talk Radio, where dreams
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Maria in Chicago. Hey, Maria, what's on your mind today?
Hi, nice to talk to you. This is my second time and a long-time listener. There's a few things I wanted to discuss. As a Catholic and Democrat, rather progressive, I really strongly believe in the separation of church and state. It seems like when the two gets together, it causes corruption.
Yep.
But interestingly enough, though, I love the idea that Pope Francis appointed McElroy as the new Archbishop of Washington, D.C., who happens to be a critic of Trump's within his first administration because he is pro-immigration, pro-refugees.
Yep.
So I'm glad to hear that that's the case, even though I truly believe in the separation of church and state, but that there's a voice in the wilderness, so to speak up against this man who I think is bent on destroying our country and our democracy. I'm glad to know that there are people who are willing to step and fight, even though many of us may feel like, we may not get much. But you know what? In 2 years' time, we're going to take back the House and the Senate. The other thing I wanted to discuss was Trump's idea of taking Greenland and Panama. And I was like, I remember during the first administration, he wanted to trade Puerto Rico, which is my mother's and father's homeland, for Greenland. I mean, the guy is such a jerk, and treated Puerto Rico horribly, throwing the paper towels and stuff. And then Puerto Rico didn't have any electricity during New Year's. So you know what? Our island has suffered. So I wonder what Greenland would suffer with Trump hoping to take over. I'm just like, it's hysterical. It's just hysterical.
I don't think they're going to be interested, and I don't. Of course, Greenland is a territory of Denmark right now. Although there is an independence movement in Greenland, but I don't think it's going to get much purchase. But Denmark has already said, forget it, buddy. But here goes Don Jr. off to Greenland. I think we're going to see a lot of these kind of stunts as ways to distract us from actual crimes that are being committed, and with the left hand while we're watching the right hand, as it were. that we certainly saw a lot of that during the last Trump administration. That's kind of his strategy. But you know, Jim Stewartson, who's going to be on the program at the top of the next hour, in about 20 minutes or so, he's of the opinion that what Trump is trying to do is establish basically a North American, from the Central America, from the Panama Canal up to Greenland. Greenland is arguably part of North America. I mean, it's not part of our continent; it's an island. But if you look on a map, it's kind of an island off the coast of Canada. That he's trying to establish this kind of North American right-wing empire, while Putin is trying to take over Europe and establish a new Russian empire, and China is trying to take over Taiwan and ultimately South Korea and Japan and establish an Asian empire. And there will be these three empire-based spheres of influence. Jim's not the only person who's suggesting this. There's a number of people who are saying these things. Who knows?
You know what? These empire makers are delusional, and eventually what's going to happen, like any empire, it falls apart.
Yeah.
And I am looking forward to the day that we no longer have to deal with Putin, Trump, or any of the MAGA nuts that I call them. I call them MAGA nuts, and I have a few in my family and friends, because I'm heartily sorry. But you know what? Even though I was so disappointed and heartbroken by what happened in November, I have not given up the fight.
Yeah, good on you.
I have to voice my opinion, and I strongly believe in our democracy, equality. I believe we are all a family, and we have to fight. We have to fight to support each other.
I'm with you. That's why I'm still here. Maria, thank you. Thank you so much for the call.
Thanks
you. For listening to WCPT.
Thank you,
Yep, good talking to you. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's on your mind today?
I just to add on from the Michigan caller last hour, Denise, about blaming immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
It's really human nature to blame other people as long as they exist to escape their own responsibility.
I don't understand.
Because if you're your own...
Oh, to blame. That was the word. I missed your word, blame. Yeah, now I get it. I got it. Yeah, I understand now. I thought you said bring.
That's what they try to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's as long as they exist, they are always to blame on other and others.
And Trump is the master of that.
And,
I mean, he's, nobody, him and nobody on his side has ever done anything wrong. It's always somebody else's fault. And he's always whining about it. He's the biggest snowflake, I've ever seen. I mean, it's just incredible.
If he's all on his own, he got to be responsible for everything that he does.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's. I think he was probably severely punished for his misbehavior as a child, and he just cannot accept responsibility as a result. He's, his survival strategy was to always deflect blame, and now, our entire nation is suffering for the sins of his father and mother. But who knows? I mean, it's psychoanalyzing people at a distance can be fraught. Johan, thank you. Lee in Sepulveda, California. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
Oh, big things, especially what Maria just said. Stun has asked me to ask you, because she's keeping up with the fight and so is Stun, to discontinue just making it as fact that Trump is going to be our president for the next 4 years. They're still fighting, and I'm all straight with them. The other thing that they said is by next Tuesday, they are going to release something that is going to be for all of us who oppose Trump to have legal constitutional method to stop him, so that until January 20th at noon, when he, is inaugurated or not, that they're putting up this fight before next Tuesday is the latest they said it's going to come out. They're not sure when it's going to come out. But from Tuesday until January 19th, we're going to have a capability of stopping them. And so there's that. It's on, as I had said before, PASOIR.com. That's where you can find Stun, and on that blog. And they're after this. They are just asking that we get U.S. citizens, voters, to say, no, we are not going to have this felon in our White House. Absolutely not.
Well, when you've got a plan that sounds workable, Lee, give me a call and let me know. I appreciate that. Poppy in Oak Ridge, Oregon. Hey, Poppy, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for your program. My question revolves around, I've been following the BRICS and the de-dollarization, and the statement is that our money will be worth something until it's not. And I'm wanting to know, I live in Oregon, down by Eugene, where would I buy silver without getting scammed?
Right. Probably if you want to invest in gold or silver, you have two options, or actually you have three. You have multiple options. One way is you can buy exchange-traded funds, of mining companies or there's a bunch of gold and silver ETFs. Some of them just actually buy gold or buy silver, and you're basically buying a share in the company that owns it, and the shares reflect the price of gold and silver. That's one way. Another way is to buy shares in mining companies. There's a bunch of companies that, both American and foreign mining companies, that mine gold and silver, and their prices generally reflect the prices of gold and silver. Another way is to buy what's called junk, another way is to buy bullion. You can buy gold and silver bullion, and there are dealers who sell this stuff. You can find them online, but I would always prefer, and I have in the past bought gold and silver. I don't recommend it any longer, but there was a time back in the 80s when I was very into it, and I would recommend that you build a relationship with a local coin dealer. Typically, your coin dealers, your rare coin dealers, that sell to collectors, also sell gold and silver coins that are collectible. Very often, they also sell bullion, and if they don't sell it routinely, they can certainly get it. And then, if you're going to buy gold or silver coins, you have two choices. One is collectible coins, where you not only have the appreciation of the underlying value of the metal, but you also have the appreciation of the numismatic value, the collectible value, which is also subject to variation. Typically, collectibles go down in value during recession, so just be advised. Or you can buy what's called junk gold or junk silver, which is old coins that are all beat up, and therefore they have no numismatic value, but they're mostly silver. You buy bags of quarters, or buy bags of mercury dimes, or bags of old gold coins. The gold coins are harder to find, but the silver coins are fairly easy to find, and basically the premium that you pay, as I recall, is about 100%. So you buy a bag of $100 worth of face value quarters, and you pay $200 for it, as I recall. It's been, like I said, it's been a lot of years. But Poppy, that's everything I know about that, and I'd be very, very careful dealing with anybody online or across the internet, and do not go with the companies that advertise on right-wing radio. Many of them are, they're not scams, but they're hustlers. They sell at high retail, and they buy at low wholesale. So it can be very, very problematic. Poppy, thanks for the call. Well, like I said, build a relationship with somebody local. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. And welcome back. Morris in Inglewood, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today? Happy New Year.
Listen, I have a question for you. In your opinion, who should be appointed to head the DNC?
Ben Wickler.
Well, you were quick with that, Ben.
I wrote a whole op-ed endorsing him. You can find it over at HartmannReport.com. It's got, a whole bunch of information about him. And Ben is the chairman of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. I met Ben almost 20 years ago when he was, active in Democratic politics. There was at a dinner at John Nichols' house, the writer for The Nation, who lives near Madison. or maybe in Madison. And Ben at that time was this, young 20-ish guy who was just, really, really enthusiastic about Democratic politics and getting in on it. And now he's worked his way up to chairman of the party. And he's an amazing man. And he has done extraordinary things with the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. And he knows how to take names and kick ass. He's a genuine progressive. He's a real fighter. He's a smart man. Now, there's another guy whose name is escaping me at the moment, who is also a good progressive, who has much of the Democratic establishment behind him, or at least the progressive part of the Democratic establishment behind him, because he announced way before Ben did. And that guy, forgive me for not remembering his name, that guy is acceptable to me, but Ben is my favorite.
Well, all right, Tom. I mean, I really appreciate that because, hey, we're going to have to continue to fight. We're going to need some leadership. We're going to need some new names. And I like it when you said that brother's taking names and kicking, the backside. I like that. Yeah. And let me talk to you real quick. Like Elon Musk, if he thinks he's going to be the richest man in the world, he's going to catch up with the Rothschilds or that oil money in Arabia. That guy smoking some bad weed, Tom. And I'm going to tell you something. The MAGA people, they're going to self-destruct. Don't worry about it. They will self-destruct. And I have not listened to Donald Trump watch any MSNBC, CNN, and none of that stuff, because that's what we pay you to do, Tom. That's what we pay you to do, to keep, I ain't going to let that pour into my system. Okay, let me let you go, my brother. Appreciate
Good on you, Morris. Thanks a lot. Good, always nice hearing from you. John in Minneapolis. Speaking of John in Minneapolis, what's on your mind today, John? Speaking of the upper Midwest.
Speaking of Elon Musk in Europe, he's really not doing that well. One of the things, he's already offended, I think, the Finnish people because he dressed down a teenager who was worried about their 700-mile border with Russia, and, I think he just dismissed, Elon.
He took Putin's side on it, as I recall.
Putin's side on it. And, there's a whole right-wing lurch in Europe, too. I mean, they're going through a very similar process that we're going.
And it's also being driven by immigration, by brown-skinned immigrants.
Yep, there's a lot of racism. Yep. It is driven by that. Nehammer now is Chancellor of Austria. You've got Maloney. But, Elon doesn't really interact with people very well. He's not a good ambassador to the 2025 Heritage Foundation movement. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as your previous caller said, he's going to insult the Rothschilds and other people there, and they're just going to look at him like, well, you. But he is very, very wealthy.
New money.
In their group.
Yeah, it's entirely possible, John. The future is getting increasingly hard to predict. So we're just going to have to live through it and, keep on fighting. John, thanks a lot for the call. Always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it, and Happy New Year. We'll be back with more of your calls in just 1 minute. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, Tom, Happy New Year to you and all your family.
Back at you.
And, all your people there at your show. Great work. I apologize. I want to change the subject on my call, Tom. As you know, the economy, the United States economy, is largely a service-based economy. I think that Trump is going to have trouble deporting or, trying to stop immigrants from coming in because the service corporations that provide, for example, the agricultural products and food, and restaurants, etc., they depend largely on labor from immigrants that are coming in here, low-paying jobs.
Yeah.
So how is he going to fill that void? He's going to have a backlash from companies and the food industry regarding this, and also the immigration policy that he's trying to implement is largely very racist. It's based on trying to deport or getting rid of people who are already legal citizens of the United States. And so I think there's going to be a lot of backlash from this. I don't know if he's going to be able to get away with that, but I wanted to hear your comments on that, and I take my call off the air. And thank you for everything you do, Tom.
Oh, my pleasure, Alfredo. And I share your confusion's not the right word, uncertainty, shall we say, about how this is going to play out. Trump is subject to multiple currents, as it were. I mean, he's got a white supremacist right-wing base that wants him to just get rid of all the people with brown skin or anybody who's not Christian. And on the other hand, he's got a bunch of billionaires and CEOs who are making pilgrimages to Mar-a-Lago right now, so that, to kiss his ass and hand him envelopes with $1 million checks in them. And many of them are going to expect to get in exchange for that $1 million. And by the way, it's going into his inaugural fund, which means he can basically just turn it, whatever's left over to his own use, as he did back in 2016, apparently. Many of them are people who make extensive use of immigrants, or their companies do, or who, and this also bleeds over into the tariff issue, or who, make extensive use of imported goods and want to continue to be able to, bring goods in from other countries without having to pay tariffs. Tim Cook with Apple probably is at the top of that list. Virtually everything Apple makes is made in China, right? So, Trump is going to be subject to some real interesting political and economic conflicts or cross currents. And how that's going to play out, and the fact that he's not going to be running for re-election, which means he can basically tell his MAGA base to go screw themselves, although the risk is that that will exacerbate the losses that he will experience in the midterm elections in 2 years. But, he's not like the kind of candidate that's thinking about how he's going to run for the next term, unless he can get the 27th Amendment, I think it is, or 24th Amendment. I forget which amendment it is, but, the amendment that says you can only serve 2 terms. If he can get that overturned, or if he can get the Supreme Court to rule against that, who knows? But he'll be 82, by the time he would be running for re-election. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think he may have more freedom than many presidents have felt, politically speaking. So we'll see. Josh in Monroe, Wisconsin. Hey, Josh, what's up?
Hey, hate to rewind you here, but earlier you were talking about the 14th Amendment, and I know that's the amendment that basically gave citizenship to the freed slaves.
Right.
I just had my first kid last year. He's black, his mom's black, and just wondering, are we also going to have to worry about them trying to go after the citizenship of our black brothers and sisters here in this country?
I doubt
they
that.
were not citizens at the time of that amendment.
I doubt that. I mean, that has been settled. But I think that certainly John Eastman is coming right out and saying, and Stephen Miller, that they intend to go after people whose parents were illegal immigrants who were born in the United States and have claimed U.S. citizenship. They're going to try to denaturalize remove their citizenship from them. And so, again, this could be bluff. It could be distraction, from he's trying to rip us off or pollute the air and water more or give more subsidies to the fossil fuel industry or whatever. We're just going to have to wait and see. Josh, thanks for the call. Up next, Jim Stewartson's going to be with us with Stevenson is going to be with us with some, Stewartson, pardon me, with some really fascinating stories. You're going to really want to hear. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcast. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcast normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Jim Stewartson. Great to have you back, Jim. He's the author of Radicalized, Truth Survives podcast. He writes the Mind War Substack, mind-war.com, and it's free. It's really worth subscribing to. You can find him on Substack at jim-stewartson, stewartson.bsky.social. And Jim, welcome back. Your article about the Elon just blew my mind. It was a piece of history that I had no idea about, and I wanted you to come on and share it with our viewers and listeners. Let's start in 1948 in Operation Paperclip.
classified program that the U.S. intelligence services executed at the end of World War II and for years after. And it brought over at least 1,600 Nazi engineers, scientists, and others over to the United States to help fight the Cold War. And one of those Nazis was a guy named Werner von Braun. And Werner von Braun invented the V-2 rocket, which was otherwise known as the Vengeance rocket, and it terrorized London and Antwerp at the end of World War II. And this guy who created the V-2 rocket was part of Operation Paperclip, and he's relevant, it seems, to the richest man's life in ways that are surprising.
Yeah, so he comes to America, and while he's here, he writes a book called Mars Project in German at Fort Bliss, Texas, and publishes it in 1952 in English. Tell us about the science fiction novel that Werner von Braun wrote.
Yes, well, it's a science fiction novel, but it's a very technical science fiction book. The whole last third of it is real technical drawings, etc.
It was written by a rocket scientist.
It was by one of the most famous rocket scientists in history. Right. He was a Nazi, but he was a legitimate rocket scientist. But he wrote this science fiction book called Mars Project. And in the book, there is a sort of figure on Earth who demands that we become multiplanetary, which is something Elon Musk says constantly, and that we have to colonize Mars. Well, it turns out when you get to Mars, there's a colony there already, and the leader. What's that?
In the novel, yeah.
In the novel, yes. We're not breaking news here. Yes, in the novel, you get there and there's a colony, and the leader of the colony is the Elan.
E-L-O-N.
E-L-O-N, the Elan. And so you may think, well, that's a strange coincidence. And, I kind of heard this story and thought, hey, maybe it's apocryphal. But then I went and started listening to Errol Musk, who is Elon Musk's father. And Errol Musk said out loud that as a child growing up in apartheid South Africa, he was taught these science fiction books, that he was a huge rocketry fan, and that he did in fact name his son after the Elan. So Elon Musk's father says this.
Elon Musk is named after the guy who ruled the colonies on Mars in the novel written by the Nazi rocket scientist Werner von Braun. And to make it even weirder, those colonies did not live on the surface. Now, Elon has this company called the Boring Company that drills tunnels. Tell us about how the people lived on Mars in the novel.
Well, yes. There's also, do you remember Hyperloop?
Oh, yeah.
Hyperloop was...
Yeah. Well, you tell people what it is. For a lot of people, I remember. A lot of people don't know what we're talking about.
It was this project that was meant to create a high-speed railway of sorts between San Francisco and LA, and it was going to be in a tunnel, in a closed loop, and which is very reminiscent of the tunnels on Mars that Werner von Braun said the Elan was in charge of.
Because people couldn't live on the surface because the surface is so hostile. So this entire society on Mars that they discovered when humans got there was living underground in these tunnels.
That's right, living underground in these tunnels, which tells you that even back then, Werner von Braun knew that trying to colonize Mars was not going to happen unless somehow you were able to create a subterranean world, right?
Right.
One other thing that I think is important to understand is that this colony underground was a technocracy. So it was the Elan was basically the dictator, but his court of jesters, as it were, and people around him were all technocrats, engineers, and scientists, etc. Because he considered those people to be the only people who really should be involved in such, difficult.
It was kind of a benevolent dictatorship, essentially.
Exactly, and something to know about Elon Musk is that his maternal grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was literally the leader of a pro-Hitler fascist movement in the 30s and 40s called Technocracy Inc. You can, this again, it's crazy. You can look it up. And what they wanted was a society that was ruled by technocrats, by engineers and scientists, etc.
Just like the society on Mars in this novel run by the Elon.
Exactly. One thing to know also about Elon Musk, to give you an idea of how sort of deep this goes with him, is that on his SEC filings for Tesla, he's not the CEO, he's not the CTO, he's the techno king of Tesla. Literally, that's his title, according to the Security and Exchange Commission. And the reason for that is because, that's how he sees the world. That's how he sees himself, as this sort of benevolent dictator, as you said. There's a philosophy that a lot of these billionaires have latched onto, called long-termism. It's also called effective altruism. And it's basically the idea that billionaires are so much smarter and more powerful and capable than everyone else that they should make these decisions for us. They're going to make the hard choices and let the citizens just take their medicine. And unfortunately, for the rest of us, one of those imperatives for Elon Musk is literally going to Mars, and he doesn't care who gets hurt on Earth in the process.
Do you think it's that simple, that this guy is driven by this science fiction fantasy from a Nazi rocket scientist that his father, apparently his grandfather as well, and apparently he all kind of studied and bought into, and once you understand that, you understand his worldview?
I think it's a very good window into his worldview. His worldview is very complicated, just like a lot of these guys. What he's done is sort of molded it onto the Dark Enlightenment, which is a whole other ideology from Curtis Yarvin. I don't know if you've covered it or not.
In fact, he writes a blog on Substack.
Yes, he does. He started out.
It's hard reading.
He started out as Mencius Moldbug, and his first few articles were about how democracy is basically a liberal conspiracy theory and should go away.
By the way, we should note that this is a guy who had a major influence on J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, David Sachs. All these guys are Mark Andreessen. They all have latched onto this ideology to some
of their philosopher king,
exactly
reports.
And they've molded it. Elon Musk has molded it into his sort of Mars first worldview, as it were. The one other sort of way to think about what's going on is, how Trump is threatening what? Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Panama. They've got Bitcoin stuff going on in Honduras and El Salvador. These guys want to create a North American empire, right? They want to create a gas station basically for Elon Musk's rockets, right? The size of the continent. And they really do believe that they are so much more superior than, the rubes and the poors, that they should be making those decisions for us. And democracy is really a very inconvenient, side effect.
Is this philosophy, and my apologies, we only have 45 seconds till we hit a hard break here, but is this kind of like the during the Cold War, where you had the spheres of influence? You had the Soviets, you had the Americans, you had the Chinese.
Well, absolutely. What they follow Alexander Dugin, and without going too far into it,
Putin's philosophy.
His whole idea is that this is all globalism, right? And so what they want to do is break up this unipolar world into different poles. And one of those poles would be North America. One would be Eurasia, with Moscow as the third Rome, and the other would be China and Taiwan. And that's basically how they've decided to carve up the plan.
And ultimately probably South Korea and Japan get subsumed into that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. Jim, you're doing just amazing work, and I love your newsletter. I encourage everybody to check it out. It's mind-war.com is the website. Or you can just go over to substack.com and plug in Mind War. Jim Stewartson writes this. He's also Jim-Stewartson over on Blue Sky. Jim, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Great talking to you. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with your calls right after this. Stay tuned. And welcome back. That stuff just blows my mind. Nate in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Nate, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah, for as good as it could be, right? So the Democratic Party completely failed us. MAGA is
not completely, but somewhat.
Well, right. But
that.
This was a misinterpretation. They never understood that MAGA is actually a financial takeover of this country, masquerading as a political movement. And if we continue to play by the so-called rules, norms, traditions, we are going to get effing steamrolled.
I agree with that analysis, Nate.
We cannot. I mean, the peaceful transfer of power, that was until January 6, 2021. The greatest gift we've given to the world, essentially.
Yeah.
And now we are handing it over with a handshake and a smile to a man that the DOJ, the FBI, intel agencies, I'm sure have a plethora of evidence showing that he is not only a traitor, but he's committed crimes against the United States, and we are handing the keys over to him. And I will never, ever forget, or comprehend. I mean, people, Donald Trump was not silent for those 4 years. He's going on these podcasts that people in the Democratic Party roll their eyes and say, well, these people have 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, even 50,000. Imagine if Barack Obama were to find a post that somebody put on X or Twitter, whatever the hell it's called, and it was a good, insightful tweet, and he retweets it. That sort of thing, like getting the exposure because social media is what's driving the conversation. Social media is what is where 90% of the information that young people especially get their news from is bereft of context. And the Democratic Party, except for AOC, and speaking of it, where are our elected leaders? But besides Bernie and AOC, I have not seen anybody.
Yeah, and Sheldon Whitehouse is out there. There have been a few who are speaking out and doing a good job.
Yeah. You're right. I'm sorry, but just overall, like what in the most important cycle that we could ever imagine, and we completely bungled it.
Yeah.
And there was other mitigating factors, and I'm sure when you have the world's richest human being financing the thing and whatever shitty stuff he did behind the scenes, who knows? And now we're handing the country over to criminals.
Yeah, no, I get it. And Nate, I think you just used a word we can't use on the air, so I've got to I've got to move along. But thank you for the call. Michael, and my apologies if anybody was offended. Michael in Las Vegas. Hey, Michael, you got a quick one?
Yeah. Hey, Tom. How come the mainstream media don't report on how during World War II the United States misruled Greenland? Do you remember when the Nazis invaded Denmark?
Mm-hmm.
The United States placed a protectorate over Greenland. And from the books that I read, that we misruled those people. So why would the Greenlanders want us back?
Well, they don't. I don't know as much as you do about that history, Michael. I haven't read those books, but I do know that the people in Greenland do not want to be part of the United States. They're quite happy to be part of the European Union, and whether their association with Denmark is going to continue forever is kind of an open question. But for the moment, it's pretty solid. Spot on, Michael. Brilliant analysis. Thank you so much for sharing that. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. There is a long history of right-wing, conservative, Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices becoming liberals, or at least becoming reasonable. Earl Warren is probably the best-known example. He was, a right-wing governor of California. He was a hard-ass Alameda County prosecutor, a district attorney, and when Eisenhower put him on the court, a year later, he did the Brown v. Board of Education case. He ended discrimination, racial discrimination in schools, or at least, tried to end it. So why are Republican billionaires now sucking up to conservative members of the Supreme Court? In my opinion, it's not a quid pro quo. They're not trying to get specific votes on specific issues. They're trying to prevent them from doing what Earl Warren did, which is waking up and voting for the benefit of America rather than just their patrons. There's a whole piece about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour, and after having all of our minds blown by Jim's story about Nazi rocket scientists and it's just an incredible story. What's on your mind? Let's pick up your calls here. John in North Chelmsford, Massachusetts. How do you say that, John?
It's Chelmsford.
Oh, Chelmsford. Okay.
Yeah. My mind is blown by the last 25 minutes.
Was that an amazing story? And it's all, Jim's got it all laid out. He's got all the quotes and everything, over on his website. It's just incredible.
Oh, my God. Awesome. I just want to talk about Canada for a minute. My dad, he's in his 90s. He was born in Montreal. I've got a lot of friends, relatives, and ham radio friends up in the area, Quebec. Mm-hmm. And they are furious at this garbage coming out of Trump's mouth. And, of course, Quebec is very restive and has its own...
You mean about Canada being the 51st state?
Yeah. And I told him, try to calm him down. I said, Trump is a false messiah with the jawbone of an ass. But they're still, I don't blame them. Trumpism is creeping up there. Trumpthink, I call it. And,
you remember the truckers' protest in Canada back in 2020?
I sure do. And I was absolutely shocked to see some of the trucks with swastikas on the side of them.
Yep. And many of them had Trump banners in Canada.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the leader of the Conservative Party up there, the Progressive Conservatives, he's a Trump wannabe.
And he's probably going to be the next prime minister.
Which is absolutely scary. Yeah. And, my friends, they
I'll bet Elon's going to help him.
To the south with great trepidation. And they do not want to be the 51st state or however they want to carve the place up. And then what's Trump going to do about little St. Pierre and Miquelon right off the coast of Newfoundland? That's French territory from France.
Oh, is there an island off the coast of Canada that's still owned by France?
Yes, St. Pierre and Miquelon, right off the coast of Newfoundland.
I had no idea.
Yeah, even if you're Canadian, you need a passport to get on it.
Is there a French military outpost there?
Yeah, I actually worked 2 hams that were there. So anyway.
Amazing. Well, John, thanks for the call. 73s.
Okay, 73, Tom.
Great hearing from you. And we'll continue the conversation another time. It's 27 minutes past the hour. I'll be picking up your calls here on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, give me a break. The court got that wrong. Stick around. Back with your calls.
Our book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the president, the chief executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the president had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th president of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it.
Turn off that channel, it's filling you with lies, spreading fear and anger beneath those polished ties. They twist the truth and bend the facts, it's all a grand disguise. Don't let them rot your mind away, don't buy their alibis. Don't listen to Fox, so-called news. It's misleading, it's wrong, it's designed to confuse. It will watch your brain and make you mean. Turn off the noise and say the truth unseen. They profit from division and from the seeds of hate. They turn our friends to enemies and twist the public fate. They shout with indignation while hiding what is true. Don't let them take your kindness. Don't let them poison you. Don't listen to Fox.
Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here. Michelle in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I am just curious. They keep throwing around this birthright, citizenship. How do I prove I'm a citizen? Both my parents were born at home. I do not have their birth certificates. But yet my husband, who both his parents are born in Italy and have their citizenship, he can prove he's an American citizen. How do I prove I'm an American citizen? And as a lawyer, I'm thinking, how do I tell? I live in a neighborhood of immigrants. My neighbor across the street from Vietnam, she can prove she's a citizen. I don't know what do we do? I don't think 2 steps ahead, Tom, and I'm very frustrated. Yeah. As you can tell.
I get it, Michelle. The old expression, the devil's in the details, I think applies here. Stephen Miller and John Eastman, in their absolute crusade to reduce the population of non-white people living on, in America, are going to have a heavy lift here if they go after this kind of.
I am a white. I can glow in the dark, white, redhead woman, but I can't prove I'm American.
They probably won't even bother you.
Prove. Oh well, I'm married to an Italian. I live in. That's my fear. What do I tell my other clients?
Yeah.
Here's how you prove you're an American. You pledge allegiance to a flag? I don't understand, Tom. So I'm just going to wait for your very informed listeners to teach me more and wait for their ideas.
Well, me too. And we're going to see how this shakes out. I mean, there's going to be an attempt to blow up birthright citizenship. We know that now. We know what the rationale for it is going to be, the primary rationale. There's a secondary rationale that John Eastman is also putting forward that which I didn't have time to get to when I was going through the whole list, which is the invader rationale. Just like diplomats, children born here do not have citizenship because they're not subject to the laws of America. The same is true of invaders who are not subject to the laws of America because they're specifically here to overthrow America. Well, Eastman and Trump are claiming that illegal immigrants, in quotes, people who came here without legal status, are invaders. And as such, they're, that 1898 Supreme Court or 1889 Supreme Court decision, Hang Wong, I think it was, whatever it was, applies to them. And, in other words, they have no claim to citizenship. So,
well, one of my dearest friends is from London. She immigrated here in '89 when she was, a teenager. Mm-hmm. Her mother did not complete her paperwork, but now she's working on her citizenship. She has more things to say I'm an American than I do. So I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wait for your callers and listeners to give me some advice. It's going to be a mess.
I think they're going to start, though, with the low-hanging fruit, which is brown people working in visible environments, 7-Elevens.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing their job, so.
Yeah. And that will probably have an instant economic impact, and that will probably cause them to back off a little bit. But I think what Eastman is looking at is, if you look at the chronology, we didn't even have immigration laws until I believe it was 1924. It was during the 1920s when, other than the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1886, we had no immigration laws specifically that defined who was and wasn't a citizen other than just birthright citizenship. And then in the 20s, we established immigration laws based on racial quotas. The law that was passed in the 1920s said that, and I believe this was during the administration of Coolidge, that law specifically said that America would accept immigrants from different countries as long as the number of those immigrants based on their race did not alter the racial makeup of America. So, we could allow 11% of Hispanics and 14% of black people and 3% of Asia, whatever the numbers are. I'm just making numbers up, but you get the point. And that stood until 1965. Lyndon Johnson blew that up. And it was relatively not uncontroversial. It was a follow-on to the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts. But within a few years, the racist Democrats who had, by and large, by the 70s, certainly most all of them had left the Democratic Party and moved over to the Republican Party. The Republicans realized that what was happening was that disproportionately people of color were applying for citizenship, and because there was no longer a racial test for citizenship, they were, America was getting browner and browner rapidly because of, specifically because of that. And so I think that Eastman's long-term goal is to basically reverse that 1965 law, effectively, not by reversing the law, but by reversing the application of birthright citizenship. And
well, I think we should make every American white person take the citizenship test that my Vietnamese neighbor, my London neighbor, and my husband's family had to take. And if they pass it, they can be citizens.
Good luck with that, Michelle.
All right, Tom, you have a good one. Thank you.
I'm guessing 90% of Americans could not pass that test, without at least a study.
They couldn't pass the first 10 questions. What do you mean?
Exactly. Michelle, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Bye. Jackie in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's up?
Hi. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you.
Glad you had a vacation, but I always miss you when you're gone.
Well, thank you. That's sweet.
I'm wondering, I've been trying to, I've called my senators, my representative, about, the release of the documents of Jack Smith. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to reach the White House for like 2 weeks. there's no way to reach them. They don't. Phone number.
Did you try the
recording
456-1111 comment line?
Yes.
Okay.
And it just says our office is not open till after the holidays, and have a happy holidays or something. It's still that same message, and the email is not accessible. I was wondering if anyone else had run into that, but
I've had people complain about that on the program, but Jackie, there's no congressional solution to this. This is purely judicial. You've got Judge Cannon saying that it's got to be held, it's going to be appealed. Congress has no say in the matter.
Well, we all have to speak up in unison. But the thing is about Judge Cannon, she's not the boss of us, and she already threw out the case anyway.
Right.
So why isn't it a moot point?
Well, what she's arguing is that since she threw out the case, there's no legitimacy to publishing the investigations apropos of it, that led to it, or that would have.
Well, she threw out the one case, the documents case,
right,
but not the other one.
You're right, and
so
that's why Judge Chutkan came out and said Judge Cannon is wrong, and so the government is appealing this right now. The Department of Justice is appealing this, and we'll see where the appeal goes. But if Democrats controlled either the House or Senate, then one of their committees, ideally a judiciary committee, could subpoena those documents and put them into the public record by simply reading them into the congressional record. But right now, the Democrats no longer control either party and thus don't control any of the committees. And so that option is out.
Well, there's a phone number for the Department of Justice comment line.
Yeah.
202-353-1555. And the main switchboard for the Justice Department is 202-514-2000. Everyone should be calling the Justice Department.
Yeah. Not only, and I would say, not only do I want to see the Jack Smith reports, the 2-volume report, I'd also like to see the unredacted Robert Mueller report.
We have that right as citizens.
I believe so. Yeah, I agree with you. Jackie, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Appreciate it. Joanne in Berkshire, Massachusetts. Hey, Joanne, what's up? Thanks for listening to WHMP.
Hi. I take you off speaker. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make a comment. First of all, there was a song I recommended to your screener, Sunny Meadows, 1997-99. It's called Just Like in Germany Before the War, and it was part of an album, but the words are unbelievably relevant to today. The other thing is I wanted to mention that I follow the psychology of fascism and why people become fascists and why people are followers. And I happen to, as you probably do, notice that Trump is following verbatim the script, Mein Kampf script,
Absolutely.
And what he did in those first 100 days. And if you remember, first he did away with the Constitution and the Republic, but then the following year, when the Prussian hierarchy said to him, look, we don't want these brown shirts anymore, you get rid of them or we get rid of you, he got rid of them.
Well, he converted them into the army.
No, remember the Night of Knives, and then thousands of his political threats and political opposition leaders, people who had been chancellors, he murdered.
Well, there is that.
So, and I'm not saying that will happen, but I believe very much that he will turn on these people and betray them. He's already beginning to do it.
Yeah.
And the other last thing I want to make a comment of, there's a poem that was an ode, and it was the last great prophetic poet of the court of Java, and it's by Ranga Warsita, and it's called In the Time of Darkness. And I hate to be negative, but it just, now the glory of the realm is manifest and empty void. I mean, that's how it begins.
Yeah.
And the rule of rules is in ruin. It's a marvelous, unfortunately for people who study history is imposed upon us by those who don't.
Yes.
So
you're right.
For all we do, I sit here and I talk to people who are in the Council of Foreign Relations who I grew up with, and it's completely over their head.
Yeah, sadly. I get it, Joanne, and I'm absolutely as concerned as you are. And the one advantage that we have that the remnants of the Weimar Republic didn't have is that we can look back at history and see how this has played out in the past. But like you said, most people are not they're not familiar with it. Joanne, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
47 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. And welcome back. Thomas in Roseville, California. Yes. Hey, Thomas, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, thank you for having me. I want to make a quick statement. And I think we can agree that the U.S. has been involved in military coups around the world.
Stupidly, yes.
But, yes.
In many cases. In most cases, it seems.
Well, I'm going to posit this. I think right now, and right here is the time for the U.S. military to conduct a coup against a fascist takeover of our own country. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I disagree. It would be establishing a terrible precedent. But I do hope that the military stands against the most outrageous demands of Donald Trump, because I believe that he's going to try to use our military. He's going to try to get around posse comitatus by declaring a state of emergency, as Lincoln did, and use our military against us, in part for his detention, his deportation plans and detention plans, but also to go against his political enemies. And that concerns me tremendously. And the military did stand up to him last time around, but I think he's going to decapitate metaphorically, politically, job-wise, the senior management of our military. And that's going to make the whole thing much more dangerous.
Well, strategically, it should happen now.
Yeah, I get it. I disagree, but I get it. Thomas, thank you for the call. Scott in Burien, Washington. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Obviously, the election was certified yesterday, so
yeah.
It is what it is. But how come I have heard very little chatter about where it relates to the election being, okay, I guess I'll just say stolen, by all the election deniers that seemingly got positions in, I guess power or whatever you want to call it in some of these battleground states, that maybe they just didn't even bother counting the votes that Harris had, because, Trump was the first president since Reagan in '84 to sweep all 7 swing states?
Yeah.
Something's not right. What do you think?
I've been having this conversation, privately, offline, and mostly in email and in phone conversations with Greg Palast, who's an old friend and the former BBC reporter. And of course, we had Stephen Spoonamore on the program, and we've had other people on talking about, it looks like things are funky, number-wise. But based on what Greg is telling me, and also my own opinion, I think there's just 2 major factors here that led to this outcome. The first was that Republicans were successful in suppressing probably 5, 6, maybe as many as 10 million votes, mostly of people of color, particularly in swing states, through a variety of means. Moving around voting districts, knocking people off voting rolls, et cetera, et cetera. No, so that's number one. And then number 2, you've got, a fairly well-organized effort that you see with programs like, Crystal Ball's program on the Hill or some of these other, you see it all over social media, to trash talk the Democratic Party in such a way that a lot of Democrats, apparently about 8 million Democrats, didn't even bother to show up and vote this time around. So I think when you combine those 2 things, you can pretty much account for why Trump is being sworn into office. And that's why I don't do the circular firing squad here. Scott, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
Turn the dial, hear the chatter, voices rise, opinions scatter, across the airwaves, loud and clear, talk radio's always near.
Welcome back, 52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Ron in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. First of all, another book that tells the story of Nazis who came over to this country after World War II, and was The Hidden Nazi. It's the story of probably the worst war criminal ever, and he was allowed to come to the United States secretly through the Dulles brothers. And anyway, what I really want to call about...
There's a fairly grim history around Operation Paperclip and some of the things peripheral to it, particularly with regard to the CIA, because Paperclip was more about our rocket program. But yeah, I get it, Ron. I'm familiar with it.
But what I want to call about was Nick Fuentes was in Chicago, in Berwyn, Illinois, about 2 weeks ago, and he was in a shootout with somebody who came to his house, and they opened fire, and they didn't get him. But I was just wondering why Nick Fuentes was in Berwyn, a suburb of Chicago, and Trump has said that he wants to use Chicago as the first example of his border policy crackdown. He said he was going to use military and paramilitary forces, and I was wondering if Nick Fuentes was here recruiting and organizing for that effort.
Wow. I don't know the details of that, Ron, so I can't speak to that specifically, but speaking broadly, I am very concerned that Trump is going to try to build or allow to form a more coherent, more organized, more disciplined national militia, essentially coalition of militia groups, the Three Percenters and the Proud Boys and et cetera, and that they will become, Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin both have groups like this. Putin's one is primarily a motorcycle club that has spread all over Russia, and they just go around and they mostly beat up gay people, and people of color. And in Hungary, they've got these militia groups that go around and beat up the Roma, what we used to call gypsies, and Syrian refugees. So.
Dina Vidala has had problems with the Proud Boys, if I'm not mistaken. He had a lawsuit against them, and won.
He did.
So, so they're a dangerous organization, and with Trump and the FBI being neutered as far as efforts to.
Well, I don't think the FBI is going to be neutered. I think the FBI is going to become, like it was under J. Edgar Hoover, only worse. I mean, Hoover used the FBI to try to convince Martin Luther King, for example, to commit suicide, you'll recall. He spied on. He spied on me. I was in SDS in the '60s in East Lansing, Michigan, and the FBI, the Michigan State Police. They were all over us. So I'm expecting those days to come back on steroids.
He went after our organization, BVAW, also.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Thank you for your work, Tom.
Thank you, Ron. Good talking to you. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I had to call back because I heard your earlier caller, Michelle, asking about how does one prove they were a U.S. citizen. This is the year in which you have to upgrade your driver's license or non-driver's ID.
By May of this year, I believe.
IDs. By May to a real ID or enhanced. If you are a U.S. citizen, you have a choice between the real or the enhanced, but only U.S. citizens can go for the enhanced, which is $30 extra. You have to have your original documents of U.S. birth certificate, U.S. passport, or even U.S. certificate of naturalization, along with Social Security card and proof of state address. And then when you upgrade it and it becomes enhanced, it's $30 extra on top of the DMV fees. All right, with the DMV fees in the respective states.
So legally, that will allow you to say, yes, I am a citizen when they come knocking on your door. But But what if they say, you know, we don't accept that anymore because we think maybe your parents were illegal immigrants? Then what do you do?
It doesn't.
I mean,
It does not matter. It does not matter if you. Yeah, but if you're a U.S. citizen, you can get enhanced.
It's not. You know, it's not up to you and me to decide what matters and what doesn't. So it's going to be up to the next attorney general, and that's where the you know the problem could come in. But Michael, thank you for the call and thanks for the information. And thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the folks around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.